Edward tends his garden as his lover Jerry looks on from a park bench. They argue like an old married couple about Jerry's staying out too late and never checking in. Jerry breaks from the conversation to address the audience. He tells a story about giving oral sex to a stranger on a train and then growing disappointed when the man wanted to talk. Kathy hops on the swing and starts into another of her poems. She finishes the poem and leaves. Martin, Victoria, and Betty walk into the park. Martin yells at Tommy off stage as Betty and Victoria discuss Betty's divorce. Betty tells Victoria that she is afraid of life alone. Betty sits on the bench. Martin speaks to Victoria about the pros and cons of her taking a job in Manchester. He displays some insecurity about her leaving, wondering what they will do with the house and what might become of their son Tommy. Lynn and Kathy stroll into the park as Martin finishes his speech. Kathy chats about wanting to have tea. Martin decides to take up his conversation with Victoria again, arguing that her liberation has caused her to cry too often. Kathy interrupts Martin by shooting Victoria with her cap gun. Kathy tells Victoria to fall over. Kathy tells her that falling over is what the Dead Hand Gang always insist that Kathy do. When Kathy leaves, Martin launches into another speech. He tells Victoria, "My one aim is to give you pleasure," but he implies frustration because of not being able to do so. He encourages her to continue experimenting with bisexuality, but remains insulted by her indecision. They leave. Betty and Lynn, who have remained on the park bench all along, begin to discuss children and parenting. Betty worries about Lynn being a single mother as Lynn asserts her independence and ability to raise Kathy alone. Martin and Victoria return. Still frustrated, Martin continues to nag Victoria with talk of sex. When Martin and Victoria reach Lynn and Betty, Martin agrees to walk Betty home to avoid any sort of confrontation with Lynn. With Martin out of sight, Victoria and Lynn embrace. Victoria asks Lynn a series of questions in search of assurances that Lynn loves her. Lynn suggests that Victoria leave Martin, but Victoria considers her request silly. Lynn takes offense when Victoria calls her inconsistent. In arguing with Victoria, Lynn reveals that she has just learned of her brother's death in Belfast. Kathy runs in, having heard the last part of the conversation, and asks who has been killed. Lynn attempts to take Kathy home, but Kathy resists. They fight, Lynn's earlier frustrations continuing to build, and Lynn hits Kathy. Kathy runs off, and Lynn turns to Victoria to embrace.